McLaren Formula 1 have forgotten how to win. I know that they've won in the past, and I know they won this season, but I think we can all see the luck that they had to get those wins over the line. And every race that they should have won since then, they've fumbled. But why? I think a big part of it is that they're just not ready. Let's get into how the story around McLaren is changing, where it went wrong for them in the last few races, and if they can take the step from being an almost team to a winning team once again. Because since Lando Norris picked up his first win in Formula 1 and McLaren's first win since the new regulation cycle came in 2022, they've arguably had the fastest car out on track for the last 6 races. But they've not been able to turn any of that pace into victories. They've been agonisingly close with one of the McLaren cars on the podium in all 6 of those races. However, the race win itself has slipped away from them every weekend, whilst all 3 of their rivals have been able to stand on the top step of the podium. McLaren's trio of errors at the British Grand Prix only compounded the frustration of the team and their main man Lando Norris, who is fed up of saying that he should have done better. If it takes time, I don't want it to take time. I should be doing it now. We should be winning now. But why aren't they? And how can McLaren remember what it's like to fight for wins and actually get them? Obviously, we have to look at the positives here before delving into the problems. To be considered a race-winning car at this point in a regulation cycle is an incredible achievement for everyone in Papaya. In 2022, they were beaten to 4th place in the Constructors' Championship by Alpine, and look at where their seasons have gone since then. And then at the start of 2023, they probably had the worst car on the grid for almost half a season. Jump forward a full year, and they haven't necessarily been the fastest car out on track every single weekend, but they've been consistently in the fight for victories. It's always them alongside the front runners, just missing out on taking that final step and taking home the 2nd victory of the season after Miami, which for a team that hasn't won multiple races in a season since 2012 is very impressive. In Miami, the team brought their first major upgrade package to this year's car. Well, Lando saw the full upgrade and then Oscar got part of the upgrade onto his car, but the performance that weekend was another huge step forward for the Papaya team. We saw both of the McLarens overtaking Mercedes and Ferrari cars out on track, and notably, with the help of a safety car, Lando Norris got in front of Max Verstappen. But the shock came when Verstappen couldn't get back past again. Last year, with the safety car meaning that Verstappen was right up behind Norris, we would have been looking at how few laps it would have taken Max to get back past, rather than questioning if he would at all. But Norris actually drove away from the rest of the pack and finished the race with a comfortable lead, a sign that the McLaren car is the real deal. That's only been backed up since then, with the McLaren team genuinely challenging Red Bull every race weekend. Every team outside of the big 3 strives every day to be in the position that McLaren have put themselves in this season. In fact, I'm sure the big 3 wouldn't mind having some of the pace of the McLaren at this point. Even though McLaren are the envy of the rest of the grid, they've gotten to the point where they're not going to be satisfied until they start winning races and winning championships. I think Lando Norris shows that the most. Of course, he's always wanted to be in a position where he could win races and battle for titles, but a season or 2 ago, he would have been ecstatic to be on the podium. Now, if he finishes in 2nd place, he barely celebrates. There's been a clear shift in his expectations of the team every weekend, which shows a clear shift in mindset from their main driver. And I think that mindset has shifted in the fans too because of what we're seeing out on track. It's no longer, wow, what a great podium performance from the team. It's, I feel like McLaren could have really come away with a victory there. Every weekend, it just feels like there's at least one thing which cost them a real shot of victory that they had control over, which as a fan has me questioning how long it will take for them to remember how to win again. Let's get into those mistakes which I've alluded to. Imola is tricky to judge if the team could have done more or if it would have even made a difference, because even though Lando Norris did take the fight to Verstappen at the end, he was just out of reach. The main mistake came from not letting Oscar know that K-Mag was coming in qualifying and getting him a 5-place penalty, which meant McLaren only had one of their cars starting behind Verstappen rather than both. And we could have even seen Oscar win that race. Maybe he goes on to a different strategy, which benefits him more. Could McLaren have won that race in Imola? I think so, but did they outright deserve to? I think it was a close fight between them and Red Bull, and one team always had to lose. In Monaco, they maximised pretty much everything. As ever in Monaco, it came down to qualifying, and Charles Leclerc was just on another level that day. Come race day, nobody was really going to be able to make any overtakes. I know that Esteban Ocon tried, but had McLaren started at the front, it would have stayed there. Because they started in second, you finish in second. Charles Leclerc deserved his home Grand Prix win, and McLaren at least had Oscar Piastri on the podium, just in case the Monaco curse struck and Charles Leclerc managed to get disqualified or barrel his Ferrari into the marina. In Canada, qualifying again was down to milliseconds, with Lando starting third on the grid, even though he was only 21 thousandths off George Russell and Max Verstappen's joint pole time. But the problem for McLaren this weekend was the reaction time of the team when the safety car dropped. Lando was leading the race and had by far the best pace in wet conditions. It was an incredibly close call when the safety car was deployed for Logan Sargent's crash on lap 25, with Lando only being a few seconds away from the pit entrance. However, despite it being so close and the difficult conditions, Lando did have enough time to dart into the pits, had the team planned for and reacted to the safety car as soon as it dropped. Instead, Lando did another lap, costing him track position, and I think the win. Whereas Spain felt like the weekend, we were finally going to see the first win from McLaren on pure pace, especially as Lando Norris got his first pole position of the season. But we maybe saw that Norris just isn't used to starting on pole, and actually in Spain, that's not really where you want to be. He slightly misjudged the start, worrying too much about Verstappen, and then lost out to Verstappen anyway, also losing out to Russell too. And whereas Max was able to get past the Mercedes in the first stint, Norris was stuck behind Russell and lost too much time, which he wasn't able to make up for later in the race, especially because he lost out quite a bit to Verstappen in terms of the pit stops, with the McLaren team taking a little longer than Red Bull to change the tyres. Overall, it was just a reminder that Max Verstappen and Red Bull are still very good. The result in Austria can't be overly pinned on Norris or McLaren. We saw the real duality of Max Verstappen that weekend, putting in one of the qualifying laps of the season, 4/10ths quicker than the rest, and showing that he and this Red Bull, when they click, they're still wildly quick. But Verstappen then followed that up by showing his wild side in the race, causing a collision between himself and Norris, when on pace, Lando was clearly the quicker car. Had he not been taken out, we don't know for certain that he would have won the race, having that 5-second penalty for track limits, but with the pace of the McLaren car, it would have been really fun to see him try. And we know that Lando Norris can put in a qualifying lap if he needs to at the end of a race. Which brings us all the way to Silverstone, and probably overall their best opportunity to win a race, because both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri looked like they could have ended up standing on the top step of the podium throughout the Grand Prix. The first strategic error was at the end of the first stint, as the cars moved on to intermediate tyres. Norris and Piastri were running first and second, but the team didn't double stack like Mercedes did and ruined Oscar's race. Then, despite having control through the middle of the race with Norris, the second stop shows how the team are reactive rather than proactive. They came in the lap after Hamilton and Verstappen, losing position, and they went for used softs, copying Lewis Hamilton's strategy, rather than going for the obvious choice of fresh mediums. It just felt like they went with what Mercedes thought was the best option, rather than what they thought was the best option. And Silverstone was definitely their best chance at a victory out of these 6, but the team once again let it slip away from them because Mercedes and Hamilton just had that little bit of extra know-how when it came to winning a complex Grand Prix. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on McLaren for not winning in the last 6. The McLaren team that won championships and races consistently may have had the same name, but very little of that McLaren from the previous generations still exists at the team today. I mean, we've seen new facilities built, experienced team members come and go, and a completely different team structure put in place, as you would expect over the course of 12 years. So despite the name holding heritage and history, it's almost like a completely brand new Formula 1 team has entered the picture when it comes to winning races. So overall, looking at the last 6 races, it's clear to me that there are 2 things to work on which highlight this point. First, it feels like the McLaren pit wall are not yet in the position where they feel comfortable asserting themselves on a race and making difficult strategic positions. When you're chasing, it's easy to be reactive when it comes to pit stops and strategy. You can wait for the leader to blink first, but when you're leading, you have to set the standard and make those calls, something that Max and GP have shown and done countless times over the last few years. But it feels like Lando and Will Joseph, his race engineer, have too much back and forth on these decisions, which leaves them vulnerable to not making the calls quick enough. And when you're in a really competitive race, those seconds are vital. The second thing that needs to happen is that both McLaren drivers need to acclimatize to being at the sharp end of the grid. I think everyone is a little bit more lenient on Piastri, and rightfully so. It's only his second season in F1, and the first half a season, the car was awful, so he is learning a lot and having to adapt really quickly. I do think that Lando Norris, as much as he would probably say otherwise, should be given a little bit of time to get used to the new pressure that he's under. It's been a very quick rise from back of the pack team to podium is amazing to now any wins are good enough for the Brit. And he needs to learn how to start from pole position, how to gauge when to pit when leading, and how to make overtakes against the best drivers on the grid in near equal machinery. These are all things that he has very little experience of doing during his time in Formula 1, but suddenly he's expected to execute all of it perfectly. I think it's easy to forget that Red Bull, before they were these championship-winning behemoths with Max Verstappen, they had a good few years where they were right up behind the Mercedes, preparing for a time where the Red Bull team could finally offer Max Verstappen a championship-winning car. I mean, Hambot Ver became a little bit of a meme because of how consistently Max Verstappen was there and able to put the Red Bull within touching distance of the Mercedes cars. But winning takes so many different things going in your favor. You have to learn how to control as many variables as possible throughout a race. And you can only learn to do that if you've been in those situations and you gain that experience. This idea of learning how to win is something that the big three teams don't have to worry about too much. They're never too many years from their last title charge or multiple race wins in a season. Just look at Mercedes last year, or even this year. Whilst they haven't been perfect with strategies or pit stops or even their development plan, it's only been 3 years since they were in a title battle, with almost the same team and structure behind them. So when the opportunities arise for a win or a podium, they know how to turn on that winning mentality and go into a mode which allows them to get the best out of the situation they find themselves in. They were not the second quickest car last year, but managed to finish second in the championship, because they're just so good at damage limitations. And they've been able to win the last 2 races, despite arguably having the 3rd fastest car on the grid in both. With McLaren only now entering the battle with these top 3 teams, they just don't have the experience of seeing out race wins in their nature yet. So looking at it from as neutral a point of view as I can, of the last 6 races, should the McLaren team have taken home a victory? Yes, probably. Were any of those victories easy? Absolutely not. And the fact that the car is even in the fight for victories in the first place is an incredible achievement. This time of frustration is only going to help them the next time they come into stressful situations where they need to make a tough strategy call or make a difficult overtake stick. It's all about learning how to become a winning team. And I think they will win another few races this season, but next season they'll have all the information that they need to take the fight to the very top. Although another driver who needs to be reminded of what it's like at the very top is Sergio Perez. I talked about his last 6 races in this video here, and how that new contract that he signed might not actually be the best thing for him. So click that link and I'll see you over there.